That morning, Wombat Creek was still shrouded in a thin mist. A cold draft from the slopes of Mount Sterling crept down, sweeping across the dirt road that cut through the apple orchards. The sound of kookaburras laughing from behind wire fences marked the start of a new day. The townsfolk were used to rising at the crack of dawn. Some shouldered shovels heading for the paddocks. Some were boiling the kettle for a strong black coffee in their weatherboard kitchens. And some were opening up the small bakery on the main street. Everything was as it always was. As if the peace would last forever in this simple land. But this morning, something was different. At the end of the track near the small creek, an old farmer named Kev stopped walking. He'd just slung a slasher over his shoulder from his ute to clear some weeds by the fence line, but his gaze was fixed on a white panel van parked at an awkward angle. The paint was dull. There was rust on the corner of the door, and its wheels were sunk slightly into the muddy ground. Kev figured it was just a delivery truck that had broken down during the night, but the closer he got, the clearer it became that something was wrong. A pungent smell cut through the usually crisp morning air. Not the scent of wet grass or sheep manure, but a sickening stench that stung his nostrils. Kev pulled the collar of his flannel shirt over his mouth. His heart beat faster. He looked left and right, as if checking if anyone else could see. By chance, a young local named Liam was riding past on his rusty pushbike. Seeing Kev standing frozen, he stopped pedaling. "What's up, Kev?" Liam asked, curious. Kev pointed towards the van. "That smell, mate. That smell isn't right. You must be able to smell it too." Liam frowned and got off his bike. As he got closer, his face turned pale. He was right, there was an aroma of rotten meat mixed with a rankness that made his stomach churn. They looked at each other, hesitant to open the van's back doors. Before long, a few other locals gathered. Sharon, who was hanging out her washing, 2 freight workers on their way to the depot, and a few farmers passing by on the track. They crowded around, covering their noses with their hands or shirts. Whispers began to spread. Someone said it was probably a dead kangaroo, another guessed rotten fish. But someone else whispered leerily with a fearful face, "What if? What if it's a person?" The atmosphere grew more tense. Liam, being the youngest, worked up the courage to climb onto the back of the van. His hand trembled as he pulled the handle of the metal door. The locals held their breath. The moment the door swung open, hysterical screams erupted simultaneously. Before them lay an unbelievable sight. Dozens of human bodies, piled on top of each other. Some were already blue, some swollen, and others had begun to ooze fluids. Flies swarmed, their buzzing filling the air. The putrid smell was so sharp it made several people vomit on the spot. One woman fainted. A young man yelled out, "Jesus Christ!" Kev staggered, his knees weak. He almost collapsed onto the ground. Liam jumped down from the van, his face ashen. "Oh my God, they are all dead. There are so many." He could barely bring himself to count them. The locals scattered. Some ran to get the local constable. Some rushed to find higher ground for a phone signal to call the police. The peaceful morning atmosphere vanished in an instant, replaced by a panic that spread like wildfire through dry grass. Within an hour, the quiet town road was swarming with people. Some were crying hysterically, some tried to cover the eyes of small children. Others just stood stiff, as if unable to believe the reality before them. At the bakery, which was usually loud with chatter, all that could be heard was the sound of quiet prayers from a few old men reading passages from a Bible, staring towards the truck. Kev, still shaking, was heard saying in a hoarse voice, "I've never seen anything like this in all my life." When the authorities finally arrived with patrol cars and ambulances, the scene became even more chaotic. Sirens wailed, shattering the air. Police tape was quickly put up, and the forensics team got out, wearing masks and gloves. They began removing the bodies one by one from the van. The locals could only stare, counting silently in their heads, trying to accept the bitter reality laid out before them. Detective Inspector Dave Harding, the lead investigator from the Armidale station, stood with a tense face. His eyes stared intently at the pile of frozen bodies. The voice of a forensic officer was heard clearly. Total count, 79. The crowd grew even quieter. No one dared to speak. The number was too large, too horrifying for a small town like Wombat Creek. The news spread like lightning. Journalists began to arrive. Cameras were pointed in every direction. Microphones were thrust at anyone who looked like they knew something. But no one truly understood how a truck containing 79 bodies could end up in their small town. In the midst of the chaos, a woman walked hurriedly towards the crowd. Her long hair was tied back neatly. Her face was beautiful, though she looked serious. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. Almost everyone in town knew her as the friendly and helpful sales rep for an organic health food company. She stared at the truck, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God, how could there be this many bodies in our town?" Her voice was soft, as if she were as shocked as everyone else. Several locals turned to her. Sharon, her face anxious, moved closer. "Sarah, you don't know anything about this, do you? This isn't one of your company's vans, is it?" Sarah quickly shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "No, Sharon. Our company's vans always have the big logo on the side. This one is unmarked, it's definitely not one of ours." Her words sounded convincing. As if she were just as shocked as everyone else. But behind her pale face, a faint smile flickered for a split second before vanishing. No one noticed it. Only Sarah knew that this morning wasn't just a tragedy, it was the beginning of a great storm that would shake Wombat Creek to its core. The usually peaceful atmosphere of Wombat Creek had turned grim. From morning till noon, the news of the panel van filled with 79 bodies spread rapidly. From mouth to mouth, from the bakery to the small church at the edge of the township, everyone was talking about the same thing. Young children who usually ran freely down the street were pulled inside by their parents. House doors were shut tight, some even bolted. At the town hall, dozens of locals gathered with pale faces. Some women wept softly while clutching their children. The men sat nervously, gripping their knees or wiping their faces with their hands. No one had ever imagined that their fertile, quiet land could become witness to such a massive tragedy. Some people couldn't even speak, just staring blankly, as if the fear had stolen their courage. Kev sat in the corner of the room, his head bowed. He could still clearly remember the putrid smell, the pile of blue bodies, and the sound of the locals screaming as the van door was opened. His hands were still trembling, even after repeatedly splashing his face with water from the tap. Liam, the young man who had opened the van door, sat not far from him. His face was ashen, his eyes empty. As if the horrific image was seared into his mind. The situation grew more chaotic as several families arrived at the town hall. They brought photos of family members who had gone missing in recent months. A middle-aged mother wailed as she showed a picture of her son, who hadn't come home in 2 weeks. Kev could only look down, his heart growing heavier. Was it possible that one of the 79 bodies belonged to their children? The crying grew louder, filling the room with an almost unbearable grief. Meanwhile, outside the town hall, gossip began to spread. Some said this was the work of a human trafficking syndicate. Others whispered that it was a curse, payment for past sins. A few old-timers even recalled an incident decades ago involving forced labor, at a timber mill near Dry Creek. Maybe this is all connected, they said. The locals listened with pale faces, not daring to confirm anything. But a mix of fear and suspicion had begun to creep into their hearts. Sarah's name was also mentioned. Although she was known for being friendly, giving out free samples of health supplements, and often helping sick residents, some people had started to whisper. Didn't she also drive a panel van? Didn't she look strange when she was standing near the truck this morning? The gossip spread slowly, from one mouth to another, like a small fire creeping through dry grass. Sharon, sitting on her veranda, heard the whispers. She immediately scolded them with a loud voice. Don't you dare accuse anyone. Sarah's a good person, she helped me a lot when my husband was sick. There's no way she's involved. But her words didn't completely extinguish the doubt. Some nodded in agreement, others just stayed silent with worried faces. The doubt had already been planted, however faint. Elsewhere, Detective Inspector Dave Harding and his team were busy at the scene. One by one, the bodies were removed from the van, placed in body bags, and loaded into ambulances. The smell of formalin and blood mixed with the country air, making many locals keep their distance. Harding stood with his jaw clenched. He had been on the force for years, but the sight of 79 bodies at once was a nightmare he could never have imagined. When journalists started pressing him with questions, Harding said only, "We are investigating. Please ask the residents to remain calm. No one should be jumping to conclusions." But he knew that stopping gossip was as hard as stopping the wind. Frightened people would search for answers, even if only from baseless whispers. As evening approached, the local church bells rang. But this time, no one hurried there with a light heart. The congregation's steps felt heavy. The pastor's voice sounded hoarse, as he led the prayer after the service, asking for protection and forgiveness. Several women sat on the church steps, crying and praying that their family members were not among the 79 victims. Sarah herself sat in her house. Her face looked pale. A few neighbors came by to comfort her, saying that this must all be slander. Sarah smiled faintly, thanking them with a soft voice. But as soon as the door closed, the smile vanished. She stared out the window with cold eyes, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. That night, Wombat Creek fell silent. Usually, children would still be playing hide-and-seek on the street, or the sound of an old radio from the local pub would be playing country music. But tonight, there was only the sound of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. The locals chose to stay home, lock their doors, and pray. Fear had crept in, becoming a dark shadow haunting every corner of the town. And in the midst of that shadow, Sarah's name began to surface in many people's minds. Did she really know nothing? Or was her friendly smile all this time just a mask? That question hung in the air, unanswered. But everyone knew that since that morning, Wombat Creek would never be the same again. The next morning, Wombat Creek suddenly became the center of attention. The dirt road, usually only traversed by utes and motorbikes, was now full of police cars, ambulances, and vehicles with media stickers. Television cameras lined the roadside. Microphones were pointed at anyone who seemed to know even a small part of the story. The locals, usually reserved, were now agitated, uncomfortable with the glare of the camera lights. Journalists from Armidale, Sydney, and even Melbourne flocked in. They asked the same questions with an urgent tone. Is it true there were 79 bodies in the truck? Who found it first? Are any locals missing? The questions only made the residents more confused. Some chose to stay silent, others gave short answers before hurrying away. Their fear was still too raw to be turned into news. At the town hall, the atmosphere was just as tense. Dozens of locals gathered again. This time, it wasn't just to find answers, but also to avoid the throng of reporters. Kev, still in shock from the day before, sat on a long bench, his face pale. Liam, the young man who had opened the van door, kept his head down, avoiding the eyes of the people who came to interview him. Sharon was busy comforting several women who were crying, afraid their family members were among the victims. Meanwhile, at the truck scene, the forensics team worked tirelessly. One by one, the decomposing bodies were lifted into body bags and loaded into ambulances. The smell of formalin mixing with the country air made some locals cover their noses with cloth. Officers repeatedly counted the number of victims aloud, ensuring it was clearly heard. 79, a number that made everyone fall silent, as if their tongues were tied. Detective Inspector Dave Harding stood near the truck, his face serious. He noted every detail of the report, trying to piece together the confusing events. For him, this case was too big to be just an accident or petty crime. There was something meticulously planned behind it all. In the middle of the investigation, a constable found something in the truck's cabin. A worn folder was tucked into the dashboard compartment. When he opened it, he found delivery documents with the letterhead of a health food distribution company. The name printed on it made Harding's brow furrow. Sarah Jenkins. Sales Rep, New England Region. The officers looked at each other. The atmosphere was momentarily silent. Harding held the folder carefully and ordered one of his men to call Sarah in. He knew the name wasn't unfamiliar. Almost all the locals knew the young woman as a friendly, sweet, and helpful person. But this evidence in his hand was clearly not a trivial matter. Not long after, Sarah arrived, walking quickly. She looked worried, her eyes misty as if she shared the town's grief. Some people greeted her with sympathetic tones, trying to comfort her. But when the police showed her the folder with her name printed clearly, the mood suddenly changed. The locals stared at Sarah with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Harding looked straight at her. Ms. Jenkins, we found delivery documents in your name in the cabin of this truck. Can you explain why they were there? His voice was heavy, full of pressure. Sarah paused for a moment, then took a deep breath. With a soft voice, she replied, "Yes, I work as a sales rep for a health food distributor. That document might have been misplaced because we often swap vehicles. But I assure you, this truck doesn't belong to my company. Our company always puts a large logo on the side of our vehicles, whereas this truck is unmarked." The answer sounded plausible, making some of the officers look at each other doubtfully. But Harding wasn't easily convinced. He looked at Sarah longer, trying to read her body language. For a moment, he saw a cold flash in her eyes, but it was only for an instant. Too quick to be certain. The locals standing around began to whisper. Some believed Sarah's words, considering it just a coincidence. Others felt it was strange for an official document to be misplaced so carelessly. Sharon stepped forward, holding Sarah's hand while saying in a trembling voice, "Come on, just tell the truth. Don't make us more confused." Sarah looked down, as if resigned. "I really don't know, Sharon. If something is wrong, I'm ready to help the investigation." Her voice was soft, almost pitiable. But for Harding, there was something out of sync between her words and her gaze. The media covering the scene grew more intense. They recorded every second of the brief interrogation, capturing Sarah's pale face. News headlines began to be formulated. Beautiful health rep linked to truck of death. Wombat Creek, once quiet, was now a national spotlight. It even became a topic on the nightly news. As the sun slanted west, the atmosphere in the town grew heavier. The locals were no longer just afraid of the bodies, they were also beginning to suspect each other. Sarah's name was now mentioned not just with sympathy, but also with whispers full of question marks. Was she a victim of coincidence? Or the mastermind behind the tragedy? The question hung in the air, unanswered, but it was enough to add to the tension in everyone's hearts. And behind all the commotion, Sarah stood with a calm face. She looked down, pretending to be panicked, while her mind raced. A faint smile briefly appeared at the corner of her lips, so thin that no one noticed. Only she knew, this was all just the beginning. The Armidale Hospital morgue that afternoon was unusually busy. Ambulances arrived one after another, bringing body bags from Wombat Creek. The smell of formalin, blood, and decomposition mixed together, stinging the nostrils of anyone passing through the corridor. The forensic pathologists worked non-stop, wearing masks and thick gloves. In the autopsy room, the stiff bodies lay on metal tables, silent witnesses to the tragedy that had shaken the entire state. Detective Inspector Dave Harding stood in the corner of the room. His face was serious. He had already received the victim count, 79. But now he wanted to know more. What was the cause of death? Were there signs of violence? Was this really an accident, or a planned murder? Dr. Rachel Price, a senior forensic pathologist, approached him, her face firm despite her exhaustion. Inspector, almost all the victims show signs of oxygen deprivation. No severe injuries or sharp wounds. They died from being trapped in an enclosed space without ventilation. Some also experienced severe dehydration. That means they were still alive when they were put in the truck. Then they slowly died in there. Her voice trembled, though she tried to sound professional. Harding clenched his fists. So this isn't just murder. It's slow torture. Letting people die in panic, in fear. That's a cruelty worse than a knife. Another doctor added, from examining their clothes, most of the victims were wearing everyday work clothes. Some were in work uniforms, some were still in casual wear. As if they were just pulled from their daily activities. There are no signs of a major struggle. It's likely they were tricked or drugged before being locked up. The news made the room fall silent. Some of the young constables who were witnessing the autopsy looked pale. One even had to step out for a moment to calm his stomach. Imagining those people breathing their last, their faces pressed against cold metal, listening to each other's screams, was a nightmare hard to comprehend. Harding requested more details. From the initial identifications, it turned out that most of the victims were locals from the surrounding area. Some of them had been reported missing in recent months. Their names were now resurfacing, but in a lifeless state. On a large board in the hospital, photos of the victims were posted, causing families who came to identify them to break down hysterically. A young mother wailed when she saw her husband's face. She nearly collapsed if not supported by relatives. An old man looked down, limp, when he saw his teenage grandson was among the victims. The atmosphere was filled with grief mixed with anger. The residents hadn't just lost loved ones. They also felt betrayed by the reality that the perpetrator might be from their own community. Meanwhile, back at the town hall, the gossip intensified. Every family who had lost a member now wondered, who could do this? Some blamed outside syndicates, others accused fellow residents. Sarah's name surfaced once again in the whispers. Didn't she often drive a panel van? Weren't documents with her name on them found in the cabin? Sarah herself chose to remain calm. She walked to the local store that afternoon, greeting a few women with a gentle smile. She even handed out a few free sample bottles of health drinks, as if trying to convince everyone of her innocence. Some locals were swayed, accepting her smile with relief. But others looked at her with doubt. That smile didn't seem as pure as it used to. Detective Inspector Harding called a meeting at the Wombat Creek police station. He pinned photos of the victims to a large board, connecting them with red string. According to the forensic records, the victims weren't chosen randomly. They all came from the villages around Wombat Creek and the neighboring townships. Several of the victims' families had been involved in an old dispute, including a case of forced labor at a timber mill decades ago. "Inspector, this isn't a coincidence," said one of the young detectives. "There's a pattern, as if someone is deliberately targeting a specific group of people connected to this town's past." Harding stared at the board, his jaw tight. If there was a pattern, this wasn't just a criminal case. It was inherited vengeance. And whoever was behind it knew the town's history inside and out. Outside the police station, the town was again cloaked in fear that night. House lights were turned on earlier, doors locked tight, children forbidden from going out. At the church, a prayer meeting was held, asking for protection so the tragedy wouldn't repeat. But behind those prayers, one name still echoed in many hearts. Sarah. Was she just a victim of slander, or was her friendly smile all this time just a mask? The question was no longer just gossip, it was turning into real suspicion. That afternoon, the air around the Wombat Creek police station felt heavy. Several locals were still sitting on the long bench in front of the office. Some were waiting for their turn to give a statement. Others just wanted to know what would happen to Sarah. The woman's name was now the center of attention, both as someone admired and as someone suspected. Sarah arrived with a calm demeanor. She wore a simple light blue blouse. Her dark hair was neatly brushed. A small handbag was held in her right hand. Her face looked pale but still graceful. As she passed the crowd, several locals greeted her with confused looks. Some still believed in her goodness, others had started to distance themselves, as if afraid the truth wouldn't be what they hoped for. In the interview room, Detective Inspector Dave Harding sat behind the desk. In front of him were two young detectives with notepads and a recorder. As soon as Sarah entered, the room fell silent. Only the sound of an old ceiling fan whirring could be heard, increasing the tension. "Ms. Jenkins," Harding said in a heavy tone. "We found delivery documents with your name in the cabin of the panel van containing 79 bodies. Can you explain why that document was there?" Sarah looked down for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Sir, I do work as a sales rep for a health food distributor. Our company has many panel vans, and documents can get moved around because vehicles are often shared. But I assure you, the van that was found does not belong to my company. Our company vans always have a large logo on the body, whereas this one was unmarked." The answer sounded convincing. One of the young detectives glanced at Harding, as if hesitant to press further. But Harding wasn't satisfied. He leaned back in his chair, staring intently at Sarah. "You're well known in this town. Many say you're friendly, generous, even helping the sick. But I've been a cop too long to just trust appearances. So I'll ask you again, do you really not know why a document with your name was in that truck?" For a split second, Sarah's eyes changed. There was a cold flash that appeared and vanished instantly, replaced by a bitter smile. "I really don't know, sir. If there's been a mistake, I'm happy to help the investigation." Her voice was soft, but Harding felt something was off. The room grew quieter. The young detectives noted every word, but their gazes occasionally shifted to Sarah's face. Some felt sorry for her, others were creeped out by her calmness. It was as if the woman wasn't under pressure, but just having a normal conversation. Outside the room, several locals who were also giving statements whispered among themselves. Sharon was still adamant. "There's no way Sarah's involved. She's too good." But Liam, the young man who opened the van door, said quietly, "That van looked a lot like the one Sarah usually drives." The only difference was no logo. Maybe the logo was removed. I don't know, I don't want to accuse, he said softly. Meanwhile, inside the room, Harding tried to dig deeper. Sarah, you know that some of the victims found were locals. Some had even been reported missing in recent months. Did you ever see or hear anything suspicious before this incident? Sarah looked straight ahead and answered in a low voice. I only heard about the missing people from local gossip, but I never saw anything firsthand. If I knew something, of course I would have reported it. The answer sounded reasonable. However, Harding was still not satisfied. He sensed a strong wall behind Sarah's gentle words. As if the woman was very good at hiding something. But without strong evidence, he couldn't do much. He could only close his notepad for now and say, all right, you can go for now, but we may call you in again. Sarah nodded politely and stood up from her chair. Before leaving, she briefly bowed her head, staring at the floor as if resigned. But as she walked towards the door, a faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips. A smile that vanished as soon as she opened the door and faced the locals outside. The locals looked at her with a mix of relief and confusion. Some immediately hugged her, saying they believed she was innocent. Others just stood silently, looking at her with an unspoken doubt. Sarah accepted it all with a gentle smile, thanking everyone who approached her. However, as she walked home along the small town road, her expression changed. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a cold gaze fixed on the ground. In the back of her mind, voices from the past whispered. She remembered her father, forced to work until he died, her mother, shamed by the townspeople before dying of illness, and her younger brother, who never got the chance to grow up. The wound was still alive within her, fueling an ember that never went out. In the distance, the evening sky turned red. Wombat Creek looked quiet, as if lifeless. But Sarah knew, the storm had only just begun. The police might feel they were in control of the investigation, but in reality, every step they took was in the palm of her hand. She walked straight ahead without looking back, letting her shadow lengthen on the dirt road. And behind that shadow, a cold smile appeared again. A smile that was no longer friendly, but full of secrets. That afternoon, the Wombat Creek Town Hall was once again filled with locals. The news of the 79 bodies was still the main topic. Somber faces, eyes swollen from crying, and the soft sound of prayers still dominated the atmosphere. But this time, something was different. The police announced that a new witness had come forward to give a statement. His name was Mick, a casual truck driver known to many locals. Mick walked in, his face pale. He was thin, his shoulders slightly stooped, and his hands trembled as he held a worn-out cap. All eyes were on him. Some locals whispered, wondering what he had actually seen. Detective Inspector Dave Harding stood beside him, patting his shoulder gently, as if to encourage him. With a trembling voice, Mick began to speak. I saw Ms. Sarah stopped at the old shearing shed near the river, sir. Late at night. The panel van she was driving was parked there for a long time. I was just looking for a place to pull over, so I happened to notice. His voice was hoarse, full of hesitation, but every word made the room more tense. He continued. I heard a noise from inside the van. Like people moaning. I didn't dare get closer, but I'm sure it wasn't the engine or an animal. It was people. When I looked at Sarah, her face was different. Real cold, not like her usual self. The locals grew restless. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others looked at each other with wide eyes. Sharon stood up, tears streaming down her face, disbelieving what she heard. That's not possible. Sarah wouldn't do that. She's too good. But several other locals started nodding, feeling Mick's testimony made sense. Harding stared at Mick intently. Why are you only telling us this now? Mick looked down. Both his hands were shaking. I was scared, sir. Sarah. She's respected in this town. If I said the wrong thing, I'd be the one blamed. Besides, everyone believes she's a good person. His voice grew softer, almost inaudible. The room became more chaotic. Some locals continued to defend Sarah, saying Mick must have been mistaken, but others started to have doubts. Hadn't documents with Sarah's name been found in the van? And now a witness saw her at the old shed. The pieces were starting to form a terrifying picture. Outside the town hall, Sarah sat on the veranda of her rented house. She was sipping a warm tea with a faint smile, as if there was no storm engulfing her name. Some neighbors came by to comfort her, even offering support. We believe you're not involved. This is all just slander. You've helped so many people. Sarah smiled gently, nodding slowly. Thank you. I just want this all to be over soon. I hope the police find the real culprit. Those words sounded sincere, making some people's hearts soften again. But as soon as the door closed, the smile vanished. She walked into her room, opened a small cabinet, and took out an old iron key. She stroked the key slowly. Her lips whispered softly, not yet time. Be patient. Her gaze was sharp, a stark contrast to the gentle face she showed the public. Meanwhile, at the police station, Harding held a meeting with his detectives. Mick's testimony could be a turning point, but it was also risky. If it was true, Sarah was deeply involved. If it was false, it could destroy a resident's reputation for no reason. Harding sighed deeply, aware that every step taken now wasn't just about the law, but about the trust of the townspeople. That night, the news of Mick's testimony spread throughout the town. Some dared to talk about it openly, others only whispered inside their homes. Children heard it from their parents and asked innocently, is it true? Is the nice Ms. Sarah bad? The question made the adults fall silent, unable to answer. Sarah knew the news had reached her. She just sat by the window, staring into the dark night. A faint smile played on her lips. For her, this was all part of the game. The locals could doubt, the police could suspect, but she felt she could still control everything. But deep inside, another voice whispered. The voice of her younger brother, a voice from a past that never left. Sis, don't become a monster. I want us to be happy. Not like this. Sarah shut her eyes tightly, holding back the emotions mixed with memories. Her hand gripped the iron key tighter. As if that object was the bond between her past and her present vengeance. And in Wombat Creek, the night grew quieter. People locked their doors earlier. House lights glowed dimly. But behind the silence, the fear continued to grow. They knew the real truth was still hidden, and Sarah's shadow loomed larger over their every step. Night fell on Wombat Creek with an unusual atmosphere. A light drizzle began to wet the corrugated iron roofs of the houses. The wind carried the smell of damp earth mixed with an unexplainable anxiety. In a small house on the edge of town, Mick sat nervously on a wooden chair. His hand held a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. His mind was still filled with the images from the town hall. The voices of the locals, their stares, and Detective Inspector Harding's words echoed in his head. Your testimony is important, but be careful. If Sarah is involved, she's not someone to be trifled with. Mick swallowed hard. He knew the risk he was taking. Since returning from the town hall, his heart hadn't been calm. Several times, he felt like someone was following him from a distance. But every time he turned, the street was empty, accompanied only by the dim light from the houses. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination. But his heart wouldn't stop racing. Knock, knock, knock. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on his door. Mick jumped. "Who is it?" he asked nervously. There was no answer, just a louder knock. Knock, knock, knock. Carefully, he got up, approached the door, and opened it slowly. His yard was empty. There was only the light rain falling on the ground, and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But his eyes immediately focused on something stuck in the doorframe. A small knife, holding a neatly folded piece of paper. His hands trembled as he pulled the paper free. The writing on it made his face turn pale. "Your mouth could be your grave. Shut up, or your body will be in the next truck." The paper fell from his hand. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the chair. His breath came in short gasps, cold sweat pouring down his forehead. He knew this threat was real. He couldn't sleep that night. The lamp stayed on. His eyes darted between the window and the door. Every small sound made him jump. He wanted to report it to the police, but fear made him hesitate. What if the culprit found out? What if he really did become the next victim? The next morning, the bad news spread quickly. Detective Inspector Harding and several officers came to Mick's house after hearing he had received a threat. But when they arrived, the door was unlocked. Their calls went unanswered. Carefully, they entered, and what they found made the atmosphere freeze instantly. Mick's body was lying on the kitchen floor. A cloth was tied tightly around his neck, his face was blue, his eyes bulged, staring blankly at the ceiling. There was a small wound on his wrist. A sign that he had tried to fight back, but it was too late. The police stood frozen. Some locals who had followed them screamed. "Oh God," yelled one of the young constables, covering his mouth. "He's been murdered." Detective Inspector Harding knelt, examining Mick's body carefully. No signs of a serious struggle. This wasn't suicide. This was a silencing. His voice was firm, but laced with anger. He knew someone wanted to make sure Mick's mouth was shut forever. The news of Mick's death spread faster than the afternoon rain. The people of Wombat Creek sank even deeper into fear. If a witness who dared to speak out could be killed inside his own home, who could feel safe? At the bakery, people whispered softly, saying their town was truly cursed. Sarah's name was again the topic of conversation. Some were convinced this was all a coincidence. Others started connecting the dots. Documents with her name were found. Mick claimed to see her at the old shed. And now Mick was found dead. There were too many coincidences to ignore. Yet Sarah carried on as usual. She walked through the local market, greeted the women, and even handed out a few free bottles of health drinks. Her smile was warm, her words gentle, as if no storm was raging around her name. But several eyes watched her with suspicion. There were small whispers she couldn't avoid. "They say the documents had her name. Ah, surely Sarah couldn't do something like that. But it's a bit too convenient that the only witness who saw her is now dead." Sarah heard it all, but she just smiled faintly. In her heart, she knew her mask was still working, the town was still divided. Some believed, some doubted, and she knew how to keep that doubt alive. At the police station, Harding pinned a photo of Mick's body to the investigation board. "Look at this pattern," he said to the team. The victims in the truck were mostly locals. The truck is linked to Sarah. The witness who names her ends up dead. This is not a coincidence. A detective asked, "Do we have enough to bring Sarah in?" Harding shook his head slowly. "Not yet. It's all circumstantial. If we make a wrong move, she could counter with an alibi and the support of the locals. We need concrete proof. That night, Wombat Creek grew even more menacing. Locals shut their homes up early. Children were not allowed out. Even the crickets sounded louder, adding to the tension in the air. Amidst the silence, one thing became clear: anyone who touched Sarah's secret was in mortal danger. That night, the sky over Wombat Creek was pitch black. Thick clouds covered the moon, making the track by the river look menacing. Amidst the rustling leaves and the sound of crickets, 3 police cars stopped, far from public view. Their lights were off. Detective Inspector Harding got out, his face serious, accompanied by 2 young detectives, Evans and Ryan. They moved carefully towards the old shearing shed that Mick had mentioned. The building stood on the edge of a small river. Its walls were made of corrugated iron, much of it rusted. Parts were rotted through. The large metal door was padlocked, but the roof was sagging. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. But as they got closer, Harding sensed something strange. The air around the shed had a strong smell, not of decay, but a mix of oil and chemicals. Evans switched on his torch. The beam hit the muddy ground. "Sir, look at this," he said softly. In the wet earth, there were fresh truck tire tracks mixed with boot prints. "There's been activity here recently." They carefully cut the padlock. As the door creaked open, the sharp aroma immediately hit them. Ryan covered his nose with his sleeve. "What is that smell, sir?" Harding didn't answer. He had already stepped inside. Their torches cut through the gloom, revealing a dark, empty space. But in the corner of the room, something made them freeze. The floor of the shed was covered in dark, reddish-brown stains. Evans knelt, dabbing it with a cloth. "It's blood," he said, his voice tense. Harding moved closer, staring at it. "No doubt. This is where they were." They moved further in. In another corner were several large, empty oil drums. Some still smelled of chemicals. There were also dirty, thick blankets and several rags with dried red stains. Ryan shone his torch on a pile of junk in the corner, and then fell silent. He had found a plastic hospital-style bracelet, with the name of one of the victims already identified at the morgue. "Sir, this is proof," he whispered. "The victims were here." Harding gripped the bracelet tightly, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't a coincidence. This shed was used as a holding pen before they were moved to the truck." Suddenly, there was a scraping sound from behind a wooden partition. Evans and Ryan instantly drew their weapons. They approached slowly, hearts pounding. The sound was clearer now. Like something moving behind the rotten wood. They shone their torches. A large possum scurried out, making Ryan almost fire a shot. The atmosphere was silent again, but they still felt uneasy. Harding looked around. His eyes were sharp. He felt like they were being watched from a distance. Like someone knew exactly where they were tonight. After securing the scene, they began collecting evidence. The blood-stained cloths, the dirty blankets, and the victim's bracelet were placed in special evidence bags. Harding wrote a brief report in his notebook. Tomorrow, this would all go to the lab. Before leaving, Evans pointed to one of the walls. "Sir, look at this writing." On the rusted iron, there were faint scratches made with charcoal. It looked like tally marks, drawn over and over with intense pressure. As if someone inside had been trying to leave a mark before they lost their strength. Harding stared at it for a long time. His heart grew heavier. He knew those weren't just scratches. They were the final messages from the people trapped inside. They left the shed, closing the door carefully. The night air was getting colder. A breeze blew from the river, carrying a foul smell they couldn't get out of their noses. As they walked back to the cars, Evans whispered, "Sir, if all this evidence holds up, it means Sarah is almost certainly involved." Harding nodded slowly. "Yes. But we still have to be careful. She's good at covering her tracks, and many of the locals still trust her. One wrong move, and we could lose public support." That night, they returned to the station, their minds racing. The evidence was placed in secure storage, while Harding sat lost in thought at his desk. He looked at the large map of the town on the wall. Red dots marked the missing residents. The longer he looked, the clearer it became that everything pointed to one center. Wombat Creek. Outside the station, the town was sinking into fear. Locals stayed in their homes, locking their doors, hoping the storm would pass. But in the shadows, someone was watching. Sarah stood on a small hill not far from the river. Her raincoat flapped in the night wind. From a distance, she could see the police torches moving in and out of the shed. Her lips curled into a faint smile. Let them find their little clues. They are just small pieces of a much bigger game. She turned, walking away from the hill. Her voice was a soft whisper carried on the night wind. The game has only just begun. The morning in Wombat Creek felt different. Usually, the town street was filled with the sounds of children running to school, women carrying baskets of vegetables, and men sitting at the bakery discussing the harvest. But now, a heavy silence enveloped the town. House doors were closed tight. People only stepped out briefly to buy necessities before hurrying back inside. Since the discovery of the 79 bodies, coupled with Mick's death and the news about the old shed, fear had gripped the entire town. No one dared to go out at night. Even the sound of the country music from the old radio at the pub was rarely heard. The locals lived in anxiety, waiting to see who would be the next victim. In the midst of this tense atmosphere, Sarah continued to act as usual. She walked down the main street with her bag of health supplements. Her face was fresh, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, and her friendly smile was ever present. She greeted everyone she passed with a soft voice. "Morning, Sharon. Hope you're keeping well." Sarah handed her a free bottle of supplements. Sharon accepted it with a trembling hand. Her eyes looked at Sarah doubtfully. She mumbled a quiet thank you and hurried back inside her house. At the local pub, a few men sat in silence. They usually joked around. Now, they just watched with suspicion. Whispers were heard. Some said the documents in the truck had her name. Another replied, "But surely Sarah couldn't do something like that." Yet another chimed in, "But isn't it a bit too convenient that Mick died right after naming her?" Sarah heard the gossip, but she just smiled faintly while buying a bottle of tea. She calmed them with her smooth voice. "Don't worry too much. Everything will be all right." A sentence that sounded calming, but for some, it triggered an unexplainable sense of dread. Meanwhile, at the town hall, the atmosphere was just as tense. Detective Inspector Harding pinned investigation photos to a large board. There was a picture of the truck, the document with Sarah's name, the victim's bracelet found in the shed, and a map of the town with red dots marking the missing residents. The more the lines were drawn, the clearer the pattern became. "The locals are terrified, Inspector," said Mayor Johnston, his face pale. "They are starting to move in with relatives outside of town. If this continues, Wombat Creek will become a ghost town." Harding clenched his fist. "The perpetrator wants us to be scared, but we can't back down. We have to prove who the mastermind is." Evans, the young detective, chimed in, his voice trembling. "Sir, Sarah is still walking free. If she really is the culprit, It means she's always one step ahead of us. We have to find a way to trap her. Harding nodded slowly, his face heavy with the burden. He knew Sarah was no ordinary opponent. The woman was clever with words, always had an alibi, and, more dangerously, still had the trust of some locals. On the other side of town, Sarah sat on the veranda of her rented house that afternoon. Several locals came by, some to buy health products, some just to show support. One woman, Beryl, grasped her hand tightly, saying she believed Sarah was a good person. "Don't listen to those horrible rumors." Sarah smiled gently, her eyes misting over. She thanked them and said she just wanted this all to be over soon. But as soon as the locals left, her expression changed. The smile vanished, replaced by a cold, secretive gaze. She went into her room, opened a small cabinet, and took out a worn notebook. Its pages were filled with names crossed out in red ink. Her hand stopped on a new name. Her lips whispered softly, so only she could hear. Time to add one more. The night grew late. Rain fell softly on the roof tiles. Sarah lit a small lamp on her desk. Next to the notebook, she placed an old iron key. She stroked the key slowly, as if the object held great importance. Her eyes stared into the distance, full of obsession. Outside, a dog barked loudly. A few locals who were still awake shut their windows tightly. They didn't know that behind Sarah's sweet smile, a new storm was being planned. The sky over Armidale was overcast as Detective Inspector Harding and Constable Evans drove towards Dry Creek. The patrol car moved slowly along the winding road. On either side, vast paddocks stretched out, the grass turning yellow. The journey was silent, with only the engine's hum. Evans opened the worn folder he was carrying. "Sir, I found records that Sarah moved to Wombat Creek 5 years ago. Before that, she lived in Dry Creek with her family. The census records note her parents died in a workplace accident. But the report is vague, like something was deliberately hidden." Harding stared straight ahead. "I remember hearing about a case out there. An illegal timber mill that exploited the local workers. A lot of people died for nothing." As the car entered Dry Creek, the town's atmosphere felt grim. Many houses were empty. Their walls were cracked, their roofs sagging. The remains of the abandoned timber mill still stood, a silent witness to a dark past. Black smoke no longer billowed, only a large, dust-filled furnace remained. An old man sat on the veranda of a dilapidated house, a wooden cane in his hand. Harding got out and approached him. "Good afternoon, mate. We are from the police. Are you Arthur?" The old man nodded slowly, his eyes dim, but still holding a hint of caution. "That's me. What brings you police all the way out here?" "We are investigating a case in Wombat Creek. The name Sarah Jenkins has come up. We heard her family was from here. Did you know her?" Arthur let out a long sigh, his face tensing. "Sarah? Yes, I knew her since she was a little girl. She was a bright kid. Hard-working, always helping her mother. But she had a rough go. Her parents were forced to work at that mill until they were gravely ill. Her father died in the furnace. Her mother followed soon after. Her younger brother was just a toddler. He survived the immediate aftermath, but he got sick and eventually passed away too." Evans swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "So her whole family were victims?" Arthur nodded sadly. "We all knew how deep her pain ran. From then on, her eyes always held a certain fire. She rarely spoke, but when she looked at you, you could feel the cold. When she finally moved to Wombat Creek, many folks here were relieved. As if that burden of pain left with her. But it seems it never really went away. Harding listened with a somber face. In his heart, he was beginning to understand. The revenge now burning Wombat Creek was rooted in an old tragedy that had never been resolved. Arthur added in a trembling voice, "The police back then. They came too late. A lot of people pretended they didn't know anything. The mill owner had powerful connections. Eventually, the case just disappeared. The survivors kept quiet, too scared to talk." Harding clenched his fist. So Sarah's vengeance isn't just for the perpetrators, but for everyone who looked the other way. They said goodbye to Arthur and walked through the ruins of the timber mill. Amidst the swirling dust, rusted iron bars still stood. Harding imagined dozens of people trapped here, forced to work endlessly. He imagined a small Sarah watching her father and mother fall, one by one. The mill felt menacing, even in broad daylight. Evans whispered, "Sir, if her revenge really started here, it means she thinks everyone deserves to feel her family's suffering." Harding nodded slowly. "And that's what makes her dangerous. Vengeance like this knows no bounds." On the drive back to Wombat Creek, they were both silent for a long time. The car passed through a grove of gum trees. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating long shadows on the road. Harding finally spoke. "We are not just dealing with a murderer, Evans. We are dealing with a woman carrying the wounds of her childhood. Wounds left by injustice." Evans looked out the window, his face grim. "If that's the case, sir, is there any way to stop her without more victims?" Harding didn't answer right away. He just stared far down the road. His mind was racing. On one hand, he wanted to bring Sarah to justice. On the other, he realized that behind all the terror, there was an orphan who had once cried over the loss of her entire family. Meanwhile, in her rented house in Wombat Creek, Sarah sat alone, staring at a faded photo of her family. Her father, mother, and younger brother smiled in the picture. But all she saw were the shadows of their bodies, rotting from forced labor. A tear rolled down her cheek, but her lips curled into a strange smile, a mix of longing and hatred. "You don't need to worry," she whispered softly. "I've started it. The town is feeling the same pain." That night, the Wombat Creek Town Hall was filled with tense faces. A large map of the town was spread on the wall, covered in red lines and circles. Detective Inspector Harding stood at the front, explaining his findings after returning from Dry Creek. "All the victims found in the truck have a connection to the past," he said heavily. "Some had ancestors involved in the timber mill. Others had families who participated in the cover-up. The pattern is clear. This is not a coincidence." The locals present fell silent. Some looked down, others exchanged pale glances. Mayor Johnston finally spoke, his voice trembling. "So it's true. It's revenge." Harding nodded slowly. "I can't be 100% certain, but the evidence points strongly in that direction." In the corner of the room, Beryl covered her face with her shawl. Her shoulders shook. Her missing daughter, it turned out, was on the victim list. Her choked sobs broke the silence, making the atmosphere even more grim. After the meeting, Harding called Evans into his office. "We are getting too close, Evans. She must know it. We have to be ready for her to do something bolder." Evans nodded, his eyes sharp. "Sir, I'm sure Sarah already knows we've been digging into her past. That could make her even more dangerous." Meanwhile, in her rented house, Sarah sat on the floor, a single candle lit. The flickering light played on her somber face. In front of her was a map of the town with red X's on several points: the town hall, the market, the church, and the mayor's house. Her hand moved slowly, tracing the map, then stopped on a large circle in the center. "The final night," she whispered. "The night that will make everyone remember my name." She opened a small wooden box containing her family photo. Her parents' smiles looked back at her from the faded paper. Sarah stroked the photo, her fingers trembling. Tears fell, but her lips formed a bitter smile. "You will have justice. My way." The next morning, Sarah played her part as usual. She walked through the market, greeting the women with a friendly smile, even handing out free bottles of her health drink. But some eyes now watched her with suspicion. Little whispers followed her. Some still believed in her kindness, others quietly felt a chill. Meanwhile, Harding received a new report. "Sir, a resident saw Sarah stop at an empty shed near the old highway," said one of the constables. "It happened late last night." Harding looked serious. "We can't let this go. We need to watch her movements." Covertly. That night, a small police team mobilized. They followed Sarah from a distance. The woman walked alone, a raincoat covering her body. She took a track leading to a small hill east of town. From behind the bushes, Evans whispered, "Sir, she's heading for the same shed." Harding signaled for them to stay quiet. They watched Sarah stop in front of the old shed. She took something out of her bag, it looked like bottles of chemicals, and carried them inside. After a while, she came back out. Her face was calm, as if nothing had happened. She walked home without looking back. As soon as Sarah was out of sight, Harding and his team approached. They found the shed door padlocked from the outside, but the air around it smelled sharp, a mix of petrol and chemicals. Harding's gaze was intense. "She's preparing something." When they returned to the station, Evans spoke quietly. "Sir, she's not hiding anymore. She's deliberately showing us her movements." Harding nodded grimly. "It means she's ready to face us. Directly." In her house, Sarah sat in front of a mirror, fixing her hair. Her eyes reflected the small fire burning within her. She knew the police were getting closer, but instead of being afraid, she felt challenged. The final night she had planned must happen. "Even if I have to risk my own life, I won't stop," she whispered to her reflection. "They have to feel it." And that night, for the first time, Sarah smiled widely. A smile that was no longer just a friendly mask, but the smile of a woman ready to unleash the storm. Heavy rain lashed Wombat Creek that night. Lightning occasionally split the sky, illuminating the tightly shut houses. At the police station, the atmosphere was tense. Detective Inspector Harding sat in front of the large board full of notes and photos. His eyes were tired but still burned with determination. Evans stood beside him, his face taut. "Sir, I think she knows we are watching her." Harding sighed. "She doesn't just know, Evans. She wants us to feel trapped." As if to confirm his words, Harding's phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Inspector. You're looking for me. Good. I'm watching you, too." Harding's face tightened. He showed the message to Evans. The young man read it quickly, then looked up, alarmed. "Sir, this means she's monitoring our every move." Before they could speak further, a new message arrived. "Remember, the people who died in the truck were just the beginning. You're too slow, Inspector." Harding gripped his phone tightly. He knew who the sender was. Even without a name, no one else would dare challenge him like this except Sarah. In her rented house, Sarah sat calmly, playing with her phone. The heavy rain outside made the atmosphere perfect for her plan. On the small table, a candle flickered, its light dancing in the draught from the window crack. She smiled faintly and typed a new message. I know where your family lives, Dave. You can protect the town, but can you protect your own home? The next morning, Harding's phone rang loudly. His panicked wife said a stranger had been standing in front of their house for a short while. When she went outside, the person was gone. But a single red rose had been left on the gate. Harding felt his chest tighten. He calmed his wife with a heavy voice. Don't panic. Lock all the doors and windows. Don't let anyone in. He immediately sent several officers to guard his house. After hanging up, he clenched his fist. She's making it personal. This isn't just a case anymore. It's war. Evans, who had overheard, was also agitated. Sir, can we trap her back? If she likes playing psychological games, let's make her believe we know more than we do. Harding shook his head. Someone like her isn't easily fooled. We have to be patient, gather hard evidence. But one thing is clear, we can't underestimate her anymore. In the town, the gossip grew wilder. Someone swore they saw a woman's shadow standing near Mick's house long before he was found dead. Another claimed to hear a truck engine rumbling in the middle of the night, even though no one was on the road. The fear intensified. Mayor Johnston finally came to the police station, his face pale. We can't live like this anymore, he said softly. People are moving out. If this keeps up, Wombat Creek will die. Harding looked at him, his voice heavy. We won't let the perpetrator get away with this. But we need your cooperation. Don't hide any information, no matter how small. The following night, an unmarked envelope arrived at the police station. Inside was a photo of Harding's family shopping at the local market. Taken secretly from a distance. On the back of the photo was a chilling message: everyone can be a victim. Even the ones you love most. Evans, seeing it, was aghast. Sir, this is too much. She's really stalking your family. Harding was silent for a long time. His breathing was heavy, but his gaze grew sharper. She wants me to waver. But this just proves she's getting desperate. Elsewhere, Sarah savored every step of the game. She sat with a cheap glass of wine in her hand. Her lips curled in satisfaction. But behind that smile, a shadow was beginning to haunt her, too. Sometimes she heard her brother's voice calling from afar. Sometimes she thought she saw her mother standing in the corner of the room with a disappointed look. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the emotion. No, it's not over. They all have to feel the pain I felt. I can't falter now. The rain began to fall heavily again that night. Harding stood at his office window, staring into the darkness. In his heart, he knew Sarah was out there, perhaps staring back at the same sky. If this is a game of shadows, he whispered, I'll endure. But remember, every shadow needs light to exist. And I will be that light. That night, the Wombat Creek Town Hall was filled with pale faces, and eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. The locals had gathered after Mayor Johnston insisted the police give them some certainty. Lamps were lit in every corner, their flames flickering in the night breeze. The atmosphere was so tense, almost no one dared to speak aloud. An old man, his voice trembling, said they had lived in fear for too long. People were dying one by one, and all they could do was wait for their turn. How long do we have to live like this? He pleaded. Detective Inspector Harding stood before them. His face was hard, but his eyes showed an exhaustion he couldn't hide. I know you're restless. Believe me, we are working. The perpetrator is getting bolder, but that's a sign she's getting cornered. The locals just whispered among themselves. Some looked down, others glanced at the door, as if afraid something would burst in. Suddenly, The town hall doors swung open. The night wind rushed in, making the lamp flames dance wildly. A woman's figure stood in the doorway. A black raincoat covered her body. Her face was pale, but her beauty was still visible in the dim light. Everyone held their breath. It was Sarah. She walked in slowly. Every click of her shoes echoed in the silent room. She took off the raincoat, revealing a simple white dress clinging to her body. A thin smile played on her lips. "Sorry to interrupt this important meeting," she said, her voice calm. Too calm for such a tense situation. Mayor Johnston stood up, his body shaking. "You? What are you doing here?" Harding and Evans stood up simultaneously, their hands instinctively moving towards their holsters. But Sarah raised both her hands, as if surrendering. "Easy, Inspector. I'm not here to run. I'm here to deliver a message." Before anyone could move, Sarah clapped her hands twice. From outside, the sound of a panel van's engine grew closer. The locals let out small screams, some retreated to the back. Harding's heart pounded. The van stopped right in front of the town hall. The back doors flew open violently. A putrid smell instantly flooded the room. Inside, 3 new bodies were lying there, 2 men and 1 woman. Their faces were blue, they had clearly just died. The crowd's screams erupted. Someone fainted, others cried hysterically, and several ran out of the town hall in a panic. Sarah stood tall, staring at Harding. "You see, Inspector. I'm not hiding. I'm showing you everything, right in front of all of you. This isn't just murder. It's a message. No one is safe." Evans drew his weapon, his eyes full of rage. "Don't move, Sarah. You're insane." Sarah turned to him with a faint smile. "Maybe. But this insanity was born from all of you. From a world that cares more about money than lives." Harding took a step forward. His voice was heavy. "You've crossed the line. You think by scaring them, you can justify what you've done." Sarah stepped closer. They were only a few feet apart. Her eyes flashed with anger. "I don't need justification, Inspector. I just want them to feel the loss that I've felt. Everyone in this town had a hand in it. They looked away when my family was destroyed. And you. The police, the so-called protectors. You're just the same." The tension in the room was unbearable. Suddenly, Sarah pulled something from her pocket. Not a knife or a gun, but a small key, which she threw onto the floor. "If you want to know more, find the barn on the edge of the East Ridge. But remember, time is running out." Before anyone could react, Sarah bolted out the door. Harding tried to chase her, but a small explosion was heard outside. The panel van partially exploded. Flames shot up, making the locals scream in panic. In the chaos, Sarah vanished into the dark night. After the fire was put out, Harding stood near the charred remains of the van. The victims' bodies had been removed, but the smell of burning still hung in the air. The locals gathered, their faces a mask of panic and anger. Evans looked at Harding, confused. "Sir, why would she give us a clue? It's like she wants us to find something." Harding took a deep breath. "Because she's playing with us. She wants to control the game. If we go to that barn, it might be a trap. Or it might be the truth she's intentionally left for us." Mayor Johnston looked at Harding, his eyes full of fear. "Please stop her, Inspector. This town can't take any more." Harding stared straight towards the East Ridge. His eyes were full of resolve. "I'll face her, whatever it takes. If this is the game she started, I'll be the one to finish it. Elsewhere, Sarah walked alone down a dark track. Her raincoat was back on. The rain poured down, but she didn't care. Her tears mixed with the raindrops on her cheeks. I've shown them. No one can escape my shadow. Not Harding, not the town, not anyone, she whispered. But deep inside, a small voice had begun to whisper back. Her brother's voice soft, as if saying, "Sis, stop. This isn't the way." Sarah covered her ears, walking faster towards the forest. Quiet. I can't stop now. And only the roar of the rain, that night witnessed the beautiful woman's shadow, as it was slowly swallowed by the darkness. The East Ridge forest was still covered in morning fog when the police convoy entered the narrow track towards an old barn. The dirt road, wet from last night's rain, forced the vehicles to move slowly. Detective Inspector Harding sat in the front seat of the lead car, his face tense. Evans, beside him, opened a map. "Sir, according to the tip-off, this barn was used for timber storage. Abandoned years ago. But the tracks we found last night lead here." Harding nodded without saying much. In his heart, he knew Sarah wouldn't give them a clue without a purpose. This could be the source of the truth, or it could be a deadly trap. Arriving at the location, they found a large building with rusted iron walls, surrounded by high weeds. The front door was shut tight with a large padlock. Harding gave the signal. 2 officers moved in, cutting the lock with bolt cutters. As the door creaked open, a cold, foul smell immediately assaulted them. Everyone instinctively covered their noses. Evans switched on his torch, and the beam illuminated an interior that made their blood run cold. In the dark room, small iron cages were lined up, each just big enough to hold one person. Some cages were empty, but the scratch marks on the metal bars were clearly visible. Some still contained dirty clothes, worn-out sandals, and even clumps of hair. "My God," one of the young constables muttered, his voice trembling. "This isn't a barn. It's a human prison." In the corner of the room, Evans found a large wooden board with red tally marks. Below them, names were scrawled. Some were crossed out. Harding stared at it for a long time, his jaw tightening. These names. They match the victims we found in the truck. As they moved further in, a small sound was heard from behind a stack of feed bags. The police rushed over, pulling the bags aside. A middle-aged man was tied up there. He was weak, his eyes half open. He was still alive. "Help me," he whispered. They quickly untied him, gave him a little water, and carried him out of the barn. The man was safe. His body was emaciated from days without food, but their relief was short-lived. As Evans scanned the back wall, he found a small metal box with wires connected to the door. "Sir, it's a bomb," he yelled. Harding immediately shouted, "Everyone out, now." The police scrambled out of the barn, carrying the man they had just rescued. Seconds after they reached a safe distance, a massive explosion rocked the area. Fire licked the sky, pieces of iron sheeting flew through the air. The barn was instantly obliterated, leaving behind a thick column of black smoke. The locals, hearing the explosion from the town, immediately ran out of their houses, their faces panicked. They saw the smoke rising from the direction of the forest. Then they heard the news that the police had narrowly escaped the trap. Harding stood watching the fire consume the barn. His jaw was clenched. Sarah knew we were coming. She deliberately left one victim alive to make sure her message was received. And this trap. This is a warning that she's always one step ahead. Evans was breathing heavily, his face full of anger. "Sir, she's playing us. How much longer are we going to let her spread this terror?" Harding stared straight at the smoke blotting out the sky. She won't stop until everyone feels the pain she's been holding on to. But we won't stop either. That night, the town sank even deeper into fear. Locals gathered at the church, praying together that the storm would soon pass. But behind those prayers, they knew the threat was more real than ever. In a secret place, far from the town, Sarah sat alone. A small fire from a stove lit her pale face. She knew the police had found a piece of her secret, but that was exactly what she wanted. Her smile was faint, full of satisfaction. "You've seen my little prison," she whispered. "But you haven't seen the finale." She closed her notebook, blew out the stove's flame, and walked out into the dark. The rain started again, soaking the ground. Her shadow stretched out, as if becoming one with the night. The sky over Wombat Creek that night was dark, without a single star. Black clouds hung low, as if pressing down on the small town with an invisible weight. Since the explosion at the East Ridge barn, the locals no longer slept soundly. They locked their doors tightly. Lamps were left burning all night. Prayers were offered, but fear still ruled their hearts. Detective Inspector Harding sat in the town hall with Evans and several officers. Before him lay a map with red marks on specific points. Every line drawn was a thread leading to Sarah's final plan. Tom, the lone survivor, sat in the corner. His body was still weak, but he insisted on being there. "I heard her," he said quietly. "She mentioned the final night. The night when the whole town would remember her name." It wasn't an empty threat. Harding nodded, his face grim. "Tonight, she's going to try something bigger. We cannot let our guard down." They divided the teams. The market, the church, the town hall, and the mayor's house were under heavy guard. All residents were ordered to stay in their homes. No one was to go out. The town felt like a battlefield awaiting an attack. At the stroke of midnight, the streetlights on the west side of town suddenly went out. The sound of a truck engine was heard in the distance, echoing down the narrow street. Locals hiding in their homes covered their ears. Children cried in fear. Evans ran towards the west, along with two other officers. Through the night fog, he saw the silhouette of a woman standing tall. Her long hair was loose. Her black raincoat whipped in the wind. In her hand, she held a small black detonator. It was Sarah. Evans raised his pistol. "Don't do it, Sarah." Sarah looked at him with a bitter smile. "The final night has arrived. No one can stop me now." Detective Inspector Harding approached slowly. His steps were steady, though his heart was pounding. "Sarah, you don't have to do this. There's another way. Talk to us." Sarah laughed, a small, bitter sound. "What's the use of talking when my family died for nothing and no one cared?" This town looked away. The police only showed up when the media cameras arrived. "You're all the same," Tom shouted from a distance. His voice was hoarse. "Sarah, I was in that barn. I saw you crying when you left us. That proves you still have a heart. Don't do this." Sarah's eyes flickered for a moment. But she raised the detonator again. "You're alive because I let you live. But tonight, it all has to end." Evans gripped his weapon tighter. Harding put a hand on his arm. "Don't. If we shoot her now, her finger could press that button." Sarah smiled, her eyes glinting. "Very smart, Inspector. But still. Too late." Suddenly, a small explosion was heard from the north side of town. A small fire began to lick at an old, empty shed. The locals screamed. Harding realized it instantly. It's a diversion. The main bomb is in her hand. He looked straight into the woman's eyes. If you're really doing this for your family, listen to me just this once. I've lost family too, Sarah. But I chose to survive, not destroy. Don't let them die a second time by turning yourself into a monster. Sarah was silent for a few seconds. A faded photo of her family fell from her pocket, landing open on the ground. Her brother's smile was clearly visible in the moonlight. Her hand began to shake violently. "Quiet," she whispered. "Quiet. I can't stop now." Harding saw his opening. He moved fast, kicking the detonator out of Sarah's hand. It skittered across the ground, snatched up by another officer. Evans immediately grabbed Sarah's arms from behind. "Let me go. Don't stop me." Sarah screamed hysterically. Tears streamed down her face. Her face was a mask of despair. But the massive explosion she had planned never happened. Wombat Creek was safe from its final night. Sarah fell to her knees, pounding the ground with her fists. "No. They have to feel it. They have to know my pain." Harding bent down, his voice firm, yet full of pity. "I know you're hurt. I know you lost everything. But this isn't the answer. You didn't just destroy the town, you destroyed the only chance your family had of being remembered with dignity." Sarah's eyes were wet, her voice a whisper. Maybe I am a monster." Evans still held her tightly. "You're not a monster, Sarah. You just chose the wrong path. But tonight, your game is over." The police handcuffed her, leading her to the patrol car. The locals, who had been hiding, finally emerged. Some looked on with anger. Some just stood silently, unable to believe that the woman they knew as a kind benefactor was the mastermind of the whole tragedy. Mayor Johnston looked down, his face full of regret. "We were all wrong. We were the ones who looked away all those years ago. And this is the price we pay." Tom watched Sarah from a distance. His heart ached. He knew her vengeance was born from real pain. But he also knew that Sarah's fate was now sealed. The night ended not with a massive explosion, but with a wound deeper than any bomb could inflict. Wombat Creek would forever be remembered, not just for the 79 bodies in the truck, but for a woman named Sarah, who chose the path of revenge. Inside the police car, Sarah stared out the window. Her tears fell silently. The image of